One number. 158. That's how many goals Michael Owen scored for Liverpool. Not for Real Madrid, not for Newcastle, not for the club he eventually signed for and wore the number 7 shirt at. Liverpool. And yet, if you ask 5 men who stood in that dressing room with him, who watched him grow from a 15-year-old kid with rabbit in headlights pace into a Ballon d'Or winner, the answer isn't gratitude. It isn't nostalgia. It's something closer to a wound that never actually closed. This isn't a story about a bad player. Owen was never a bad player. This is a story about a decision, one specific decision, made in the summer of 2009, that turned a boyhood hero into a man some of his own teammates still can't fully forgive. Let's rewind. Michael Owen didn't arrive at Liverpool as a signing. He arrived as a product. Built in the academy, shaped by the club's own coaching staff, scoring on his Premier League debut at 17 years old, becoming the youngest goalscorer in the club's history at the time. By the time he was 21, he had a Ballon d'Or on his shelf, the last Englishman to ever win it. Liverpool didn't just develop him. In the eyes of everyone inside that building, they made him. That's the part that matters. Because when a player leaves a club that bought him, fans grumble and move on. When a player leaves a club that raised him, piece by piece, from a boy into a superstar, it doesn't register as a transfer. It registers as abandonment. Owen's first exit to Real Madrid in 2004 stung, but it was almost forgivable. Real Madrid weren't a domestic rival. They were the biggest club on the planet, and ambitious young players chasing Galacticos money were nothing new. Painful, yes. Personal, not quite. The second exit is the one that actually broke something. In 2009, after an injury-hit spell at Newcastle United, Owen was a free agent. Everton wanted him. David Moyes made it known. And by his own admission, years later, Owen knew exactly what joining Liverpool's fiercest rivals would do to his reputation on Merseyside. He said it himself, plainly. He'd resigned himself to the idea that Liverpool fans were going to hate him no matter what he did next. So he picked the club at the top. He picked Manchester United. Think about the geography of that decision for a second, because it matters more in English football than almost anywhere else in the world. This isn't a striker moving between two mid-table clubs in different countries, where loyalty barely registers as a concept. This is a 9-mile drive up the East Lancs Road, into the one dressing room every Liverpool Academy kid is raised to see as the enemy before he even understands why. Owen didn't cross a border. He crossed the one line inside English football that isn't supposed to be crossable, not for a boy who scored on his Anfield debut, not for a Ballon d'Or winner who'd carried the club's number 9 shirt as if it were stitched to his own name. And that's where this list actually begins, not with fans in the stands, but with the people who were closer to him than any supporter ever could be. Teammates, coaches, men who trained beside him, roomed with him on away trips, watched him ice his knees after matches, and believed, genuinely believed, that Michael Owen belonged to Liverpool in a way that went beyond a contract. Number 5. Phil Thompson. Before Thompson became a Sky Sports pundit known for his fierce, sometimes theatrical defense of Liverpool's identity, he was Gerard Houlier's assistant manager, the man who watched Owen as a teenager tearing through FA Youth Cup ties, who called him a spiky little fella the first time he saw him destroy a defense on his own. Thompson was there for the beginning. He watched the club invest in Owen before Owen had given them anything back. That's what makes Thompson's frustration different from a fan's frustration. It isn't about missing him on the pitch. It's institutional. It's the sense that Liverpool built something with their own hands, over years, only to watch it walk through the door of Old Trafford wearing a shirt that, to Thompson's generation, represented everything Liverpool was supposed to stand against. Publicly, Thompson has never pretended the United move sat easily with him. In the world he came from, one built on the idea that Liverpool and Manchester United weren't just rivals but opposites, a Liverpool Academy graduate putting on that shirt wasn't just disappointing. It was, in the framing so many around that era used, close to unthinkable. Number 4. John Aldridge. If Thompson's issue is institutional, Aldridge's is personal, and blunt, the way Aldridge has always been blunt, on air and off it. Aldridge isn't in the business of dressing things up. Across nearly 2 decades of radio and television punditry, he's built a reputation as one of the least diplomatic ex-players in English football, someone who says the thing other pundits are thinking but won't say out loud. And when it comes to Owen, Aldridge's read has always been simple. This wasn't a man cornered into a decision. This was a man who understood exactly what wearing that shirt would mean to the people who once idolized him, and made the call anyway. There's no ambiguity in that verdict. No room for, he had no choice. Aldridge's position, echoed across years of media appearances, boils down to one idea: knowledge equals responsibility. Owen knew. He went anyway. End of discussion. What makes Aldridge's version of this particularly cutting is who he is inside Liverpool folklore. He's not an outsider passing judgment from a studio desk with no skin in the game. Aldridge is a former Liverpool striker himself, a boyhood Evertonian turned cop hero, someone who understands exactly what it means to wear that shirt in front of that crowd. When a man who lived that exact experience looks at Owen's decision and calls it, essentially, a calculated risk rather than a forced hand, that carries weight a neutral pundit's opinion never could. That's 500 words of context and 2 names deep, and we haven't even reached the ones that actually hurt to talk about. Because the next 3 aren't former coaches or media pundits with a platform to fill. The next 3 trained with him every single day, ate breakfast with him, celebrated trophies with him, and one of them, by his own account, watched the friendship itself change shape after that summer. We'll get to him last. He's the one that actually stings. Number 3, Steve Nicol. Nicol won just about everything there was to win at Liverpool in the 80s. League titles, European Cups, the full trophy cabinet before Owen was even born. By the time Owen broke through, Nicol had already left the playing side behind and was building a second career as a pundit, eventually landing in the United States as one of the most recognizable voices on ESPN's football coverage. Distance, in theory, should soften things. Nicol wasn't in the dressing room in 2009. He wasn't losing sleep over a teammate's decision. But that's exactly what makes his position notable, because even from an ocean away, Nicol's read on the Owen situation has never been, "Time heals this." His argument, repeated across various media appearances over the years, is closer to the opposite: some reputational damage doesn't fade. It calcifies. Think about that for a second. Most football controversies have a shelf life. A bad tackle, a missed penalty, even a public falling out. Most of it gets buried under the next transfer window, the next controversy, the next scandal. Nicol's position on Owen suggests this one didn't follow that pattern. This one stuck. And if a man watching from thousands of miles away, with zero personal stake in the day-to-day emotional fallout, still frames it that way, that tells you something about how deep this actually cut inside the institution, not just among the fans chanting outside Anfield. There's also a quieter irony buried in Nicol's position. As a European Cup winner from Liverpool's most dominant era, he belongs to a generation that watched the club's reputation get built on continuity. Players who stayed, who saw out entire careers in red, who became institutions rather than transient names on a team sheet. Owen's decision doesn't just read as one man's career move to someone from that background. It reads as a crack in a tradition Nicol's own generation spent a decade constructing, brick by brick, trophy by trophy. Number 2, Graham Souness. Now we get to the layer where this stops being analysis and starts being identity. Souness isn't just a Liverpool legend. He's arguably the most Liverpool-coded figure in this entire list, a former captain, a European Cup winner as a player, later a manager of the club itself. His relationship with Liverpool isn't professional. It's foundational. Ask anyone in football what Souness represents, and the answer usually starts and ends with one word: loyalty, enforced the hard way, on and off the pitch. That's exactly why Owen's move to United doesn't compute for him in the same clean, verdict-driven way it does for Aldridge. Aldridge processed it as a decision with a clear right and wrong answer. Souness, by contrast, has spent years in interviews and studio discussions circling something closer to genuine bewilderment. The sense that a Liverpool man simply does not do this, and no amount of career logic fully explains it away. There's a difference between disagreeing with a decision and not being able to process that the decision happened at all. Souness's public commentary over the years has consistently leaned toward the second one. It's not, "I wouldn't have done that." It's closer to, "I don't understand how you do that." When someone whose entire football identity is built around the idea of Liverpool as more than a job, as a code you live by, looks at a former teammate's decision and can't rationalize it, that's not punditry anymore. That's personal history colliding with something it wasn't built to accommodate. It's worth remembering, too, that Souness himself once left Liverpool on his own terms, moving to Sampdoria at the peak of his powers, and came back years later to manage the club he'd captained. His whole career arc is a loop that always returns to Anfield. Owen's arc did the opposite, it detoured through the one postcode Souness's generation was taught never to detour through. For a man whose own story is built entirely around coming home, watching someone else's story bend permanently away from it isn't just confusing. It's almost a betrayal of the blueprint. Let me be fair for a second, because it's worth saying plainly. None of these 5 men have ever suggested Owen was a bad person, or a bad teammate, or that his goals for Liverpool meant nothing. That's not the accusation. Even the harshest voices on this list have, at different points, praised his finishing, his professionalism, the way he carried himself as a teenager thrown into a senior dressing room years before he was ready. This isn't a character assassination. It's also worth noting that Owen was hardly the first Liverpool player to walk this exact road. Others have crossed between Merseyside and Manchester over the decades, and history has judged some of them more gently than others. What sets Owen's case apart isn't the act itself, it's the scale of what he was walking away from. A player who leaves as a fringe squad member gets a shrug. A Ballon d'Or winner, a boyhood academy graduate, one of the most beloved number 7s and 9s the club has produced in a generation, doing it. That's not a footnote in a transfer column. That's a rupture in the club's own origin story. But here's the twist, and it's the thing that actually reframes everything you've just heard. The deepest hostility on this list doesn't come from the men who watched from a distance, or the ones who built their media careers on blunt verdicts. It comes from the one person who had every reason to defend Owen publicly, who spent more hours around him than almost anyone else in that dressing room, and who, by his own words, not a tabloid's, admits the relationship itself never fully recovered. That's not Thompson's institutional disappointment. That's not Aldridge's blunt judgment. That's not Nichol's long-distance read or Souness's identity-level confusion. That's something closer, and it's coming next. Number 1. Jamie Carragher. If this list has been building toward anything, it's this. Every name before Carragher explains a piece of the puzzle: the club's investment, the blunt public verdict, the long-term damage, the identity crisis. Carragher is the piece that makes it personal in a way none of the others can be. Carragher and Owen weren't just teammates. They came through the ranks together, wore the same academy tracksuits, shared England call-ups, sat in the same dressing room through years of trophies and near misses. Of everyone on this list, Carragher is the one with genuine, day-to-day, real-life proximity to who Michael Owen actually was before any of this happened. Not the media version, not the tabloid version, the actual person. And that's exactly why his account carries a different weight than a pundit's hot take. When Carragher discusses Owen now, including in conversations the two have had directly, on Carragher's own podcast platform, years after the transfer, there's no performance to it. No studio theatrics. What comes through instead is something quieter and, honestly, sadder. An acknowledgement that whatever existed between them before 2009 wasn't fully the same afterward. Not hatred, not a dramatic falling out you could turn into a tabloid headline. Something more corrosive than that. A friendship that had to renegotiate its own terms because one half of it put on a shirt the other half was raised to despise. Owen himself has never denied how much this cost him. In one of his most candid interviews years after the move, he described walking past the cop and hearing the same jeer over and over, "You Mank?" and admitted the sting of it never actually faded, calling it something close to a dagger, every single time. This is a man with 158 goals for that club, a Ballon d'Or won in that shirt, and he still describes his own boyhood ground as a place he has to brace himself to walk into. That's the real cost of this story. Not a stat, not a transfer fee. A grown man who conquered European football at 21 years old, and still can't fully walk back into the stadium that made him without feeling like an intruder. Carragher, for his part, has never used his platform to pile onto Owen the way some of the others have. If anything, his tone across their public conversations has leaned protective, almost brotherly, the way old teammates talk when the cameras make everything sound heavier than it needs to. But that protectiveness is exactly what makes his more candid admissions land so hard. This is a man who could easily wave the whole controversy away, who has every incentive to say, "It's ancient history, we're fine," and leave it there. He doesn't, not fully. And when the person with the most reason to defend you still can't quite close the book, that tells you the book was never really closed. Here's the detail that ties every single one of these 5 accounts together, and it's not a quote from any of them. It's a tweet sent the day Liverpool named Owen an international ambassador for the club decades later. Still angry at the appointment, "A snake becomes our international ambassador." That's not a stray comment from an anonymous account. That's the temperature of an entire fanbase, distilled into 6 words, more than a decade after the transfer actually happened. And if the fans, the people with the least personal, professional relationship to Owen, are still carrying that temperature this long after the fact, imagine what it's like for the 5 men on this list who actually knew him. Who trained with him, who built careers alongside him, who, in Carragher's case, called him a friend before any of this happened. Owen, for what it's worth, has never apologized for the decision itself. In interviews since, he's been consistent. He was a professional footballer at the peak of his earning power, given one more shot to compete at the highest level, and he took it. His own logic is that no one criticizes ambition in any other walk of life. You get promoted, you get praised. He just happened to choose the wrong colored shirt to be ambitious in, according to the people who raised him. Both things can be true at once. Owen made a defensible career decision, and 5 men who knew him, some through institutional loyalty, some through blunt moral judgment, some through long-distance analysis, some through identity itself, and one through genuine friendship, never fully got past it. That's not a footnote to his career. For a lot of the people who actually lived through it alongside him, it's the headline. So where does that leave Michael Owen now? Retired since 2013, a racehorse breeder, a regular face on Premier League punditry panels, including, pointedly, coverage that puts him in the same studio as some of the very men who never fully made peace with 2009. Time has softened the edges publicly. Owen and Carragher have appeared together, spoken together, even joked together on camera. But softened edges aren't the same as a wound that healed clean. Ask any of the 5 names on this list for an honest, unscripted answer, and you'll notice none of them actually walk the story back. They contextualize it, they soften the delivery, they don't retract it. That's the part worth sitting with. Legacy in football isn't only built from goals scored, trophies lifted, or Ballon d'Or trophies collected at 21. It's built from the decisions made at the crossroads, the ones nobody can undo, the ones that follow a player into every dressing room, every podcast, every testimonial appearance for the rest of his life. Michael Owen scored 158 goals for Liverpool. He's still, by any footballing measure, one of the most gifted strikers his country has ever produced. And he's also, by the accounts of the men who knew him best, a cautionary tale about what happens when ambition and loyalty collide, and ambition wins. Compare that to the players who took the opposite path. Steven Gerrard, chased by Chelsea more than once, chased by Real Madrid, who stayed anyway and became the closest thing English football has to a one-club deity. Jamie Carragher, who had offers elsewhere across his career and never seriously entertained them. The reason those 2 names get spoken with a reverence Owens never quite receives isn't goal difference. It's this exact fork in the road, the one Owen took a different turn at, in the summer of 2009, with his eyes wide open. So here's the actual question, and I want you to sit with it before you scroll past. If you'd built your entire career, your entire identity, inside one football club from the age of 11, would you have made the same call Owen did? Or is there a version of loyalty that should override even the biggest opportunity of your career? And here's the follow-up, because it's the one that actually divides comment sections every time this story resurfaces. Is it fair for fans and former teammates to hold a professional athlete to a standard of loyalty most of us would never demand from our own careers? Or is football, at this level, supposed to be exactly that different from every other job? Drop your take, your real verdict, in the comments. I read every one. A like genuinely helps more than you'd think. And subscribe if you want more of these deep dives into the moments football fans never actually forgot. Football at this scale is never just a tournament. It's a moment in time.